Today, we're diving into the gritty reality of life in the American Old West. Contrary to the romanticized images often portrayed in movies and folklore, the frontier life was anything but glamorous. Let's explore 5 reasons why. Number 1. Harsh environmental conditions. In the American Old West, the environment was unforgiving, posing significant challenges to those who dared to settle the frontier. The harsh environmental conditions were not just inconveniences. They were formidable obstacles that shaped everyday life. Under the scorching sun, settlers grappled with sweltering summers that parched the land and drained their energy. The relentless heat made outdoor tasks arduous and exhausting. Farmers toiled under the blistering sun, their crops at the mercy of droughts that could wipe out entire harvests. Water sources dried up, forcing communities to ration what little they had and endure thirst as a constant companion. Yet, relief from the oppressive heat was not always welcome, as brutal winters brought their own set of challenges. Bone-chilling cold gripped the land, freezing everything in its path. Snowstorms swept across the plains, burying homesteads and cutting off access to vital resources. Surviving the winter meant battling not only the elements, but also the isolation and scarcity it brought. Moreover, the unpredictable nature of the weather compounded the difficulties faced by settlers. Storms could strike without warning, unleashing fury in the form of tornadoes, blizzards, or flash floods. Homes were demolished, livestock lost, and lives endangered in the blink of an eye. The absence of advanced meteorological forecasting meant that communities had little time to prepare, leaving them vulnerable to nature's wrath. In the face of such adversity, resilience became a necessity for survival. Settlers had to adapt to the harsh environment, employing resourcefulness and ingenuity to endure. They built sturdy shelters to withstand the elements, dug wells to secure water supplies, and developed techniques to conserve and utilize natural resources efficiently. Number 2. Lawlessness and outlaw culture. In the lawless expanse of the American Old West, order was a rare commodity, and chaos reigned supreme. With law enforcement spread thin and often corrupt, outlaws seized the opportunity to establish their own brand of justice, terrorizing towns and settlements with impunity. Wanted posters plastered on saloon walls depicted the faces of notorious outlaws, each offering a bounty for their capture. These desperados, often romanticized in folklore, were a menace to society, preying on the vulnerable and challenging the authority of the law. Gunfights erupted in dusty streets as lawmen and outlaws faced off in deadly showdowns. The sound of gunfire echoed through the frontier towns, sending fear coursing through the veins of innocent bystanders. Robberies became a common occurrence, with stagecoaches and banks targeted for their valuable cargo. Cattle rustling added to the atmosphere of lawlessness as herds disappeared into the vast wilderness, stolen by brazen thieves looking to turn a profit. The economic impact was significant, as ranchers struggled to protect their livelihoods from the constant threat of theft. Despite efforts to maintain order, the allure of the outlaw lifestyle drew many to a path of crime and violence. The promise of wealth and freedom enticed individuals to abandon societal norms and embrace a life outside the law. Some outlaws became folk heroes, celebrated for their daring exploits and defiance of authority. However, behind the romanticized facade lay a harsh reality of suffering and injustice. Innocent lives were lost in the crossfire, families torn apart by violence and crime. The absence of effective law enforcement left communities vulnerable, their sense of security shattered by the ever-present threat of lawlessness. In the face of such challenges, efforts were made to establish law and order in the frontier territories. Vigilante groups formed to combat crime and uphold justice, often resorting to extrajudicial methods in the absence of a formal legal system. These efforts, while well-intentioned, sometimes led to further chaos and violence, perpetuating the cycle of lawlessness. Number 3. Conflict with Native American tribes. The clash between settlers and Native American tribes during the westward expansion of the United States was not just a historical footnote. It was a pivotal and often tragic chapter in American history. As pioneers pushed further into the frontier, they encroached upon the traditional territories of indigenous peoples who had inhabited the land for centuries. This collision of cultures and interests inevitably led to conflict as both sides sought to assert their claims to the land. For Native American tribes, the arrival of settlers represented a threat to their way of life. Their traditional hunting grounds were disrupted, sacred sites desecrated, and resources depleted. As tensions escalated, tribes fiercely resisted the encroachment, leading to violent clashes with settlers and the U.S. military. The ensuing conflicts were marked by brutality and bloodshed on both sides. Battles such as the Wounded Knee Massacre and the Sand Creek Massacre left a trail of devastation and trauma, resulting in the loss of countless lives and the displacement of entire communities. The consequences of these conflicts reverberated for generations, leaving deep scars on both Native American and settler communities. The forced relocation of tribes to reservations, often far from their ancestral lands, further exacerbated their suffering and contributed to the erosion of their cultural identity. Moreover, the conflict with Native American tribes was not just a matter of territorial dispute. It was also fueled by broader political and economic interests. The desire for land, resources, and power drove government policies that sought to subjugate and assimilate indigenous peoples, leading to further injustices and inequalities. Today, the legacy of this conflict continues to shape the relationship between Native American communities and the rest of society. It serves as a reminder of the importance of understanding and reckoning with the past, as well as the ongoing struggle for justice, equality, and reconciliation. Number 4. Disease and lack of healthcare. In the American Old West, healthcare was a luxury few could afford, and access to medical treatment was often limited or non-existent. Settlers faced a constant threat of disease, with epidemics such as cholera, smallpox, and influenza ravaging communities and claiming countless lives. The harsh conditions of frontier life, combined with inadequate sanitation and healthcare infrastructure, created a breeding ground for illness and disease. Makeshift clinics, staffed by untrained individuals or itinerant doctors, provided rudimentary care at best, often lacking essential medical supplies and expertise. For many settlers, seeking medical treatment meant traveling long distances to the nearest town or settlement with a doctor, a journey fraught with peril and uncertainty. Even then, the quality of care was questionable, and the cost prohibitive for those struggling to make ends meet. The lack of healthcare infrastructure also meant that preventive measures were virtually non-existent. Vaccinations were scarce, leaving communities vulnerable to outbreaks of contagious diseases. Sanitation practices were rudimentary, with little understanding of the importance of hygiene in preventing the spread of illness. The consequences of inadequate healthcare were devastating. Families watched helplessly as loved ones succumbed to illness, with grave sites marked by wooden crosses serving as grim reminders of the toll taken by disease. Entire communities were decimated by epidemics, leaving behind a trail of sorrow and loss. Moreover, the lack of healthcare exacerbated existing inequalities, with marginalized groups such as Native Americans and immigrants bearing the brunt of the suffering. Discrimination and prejudice further hindered their access to medical care, compounding their vulnerability to illness and disease. Despite these challenges, there were individuals and organizations who sought to alleviate the suffering of the sick and injured. Missionaries, philanthropists, and charitable organizations provided medical aid and assistance to those in need, offering a glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak landscape. Number 5. Isolation and loneliness. Life in the American Old West was often characterized by profound isolation and loneliness, casting a shadow over the rugged beauty of the frontier landscape. Settlers ventured into untamed territories, seeking opportunity and adventure, but soon found themselves grappling with the harsh realities of solitude and self-reliance. The vast expanse of the frontier stretched for miles in every direction, with settlements scattered few and far between. Remote homesteads dotted the landscape, each one a tiny island of civilization in a sea of wilderness. For those who called these isolated outposts home, the nearest neighbor could be miles away, accessible only by treacherous trails or winding rivers. The isolation was not just physical but psychological as well. Families endured long periods of separation, with husbands often spending months away from home in search of work or tending to cattle herds. Wives and children were left to manage the homestead alone, facing the daily challenges of survival without the support of their loved ones. In such remote and isolated communities, social interaction was limited, and opportunities for companionship scarce. The absence of amenities like schools, churches, and community centers further compounded the sense of loneliness, leaving settlers to fend for themselves in the vast expanse of the frontier. Moreover, the harsh conditions of frontier life only served to deepen the feeling of isolation. Harsh weather, scarcity of resources, and constant threat of danger made everyday existence a struggle, with little respite from the relentless challenges of survival. Yet, despite the hardships, there was a certain rugged independence that characterized life on the frontier. Settlers learned to rely on their own ingenuity and resourcefulness, forging strong bonds with their families and neighbors in the face of adversity. However, for many, the isolation and loneliness of frontier life took a heavy toll on their mental and emotional well-being. Depression, anxiety, and despair were common companions, haunting the long, lonely nights and casting a shadow over the promise of a new beginning in the West.